Hi, everyone. I guess I just start talking, and it's very strange for me to kind of talk into a void right now. Not like a live community there to chat with or anything. So I'm just going to presume that people are listening. My name is Naomi Brockwell, and I'm the president and founder of Ludlow Institute. And we are an organization that advances freedom through technology. And a lot of what we do is really just focused on building community around these issues. What I found when I first started Ludlow, and even before that, over a decade ago, when I first started creating content around decentralized technology and stuff like that, was that when you have things that are niche enough or cutting edge enough or the mainstream hasn't really adopted yet, a large part of the work you're doing is just community building. It's just teaching people why this stuff is important. And so that's really what we've been focused on at Ludlow Institute. We focus on, when I say advancing freedom through technology, we focus on decentralized technology, censorship-resistant technology, privacy technology. We help people understand surveillance technology and how to avoid it. And so we're really focused on all of the ways that tech can give us back freedom online. And this gets more and more important as the clampdowns on internet freedom get worse and worse. So it's been a huge priority of us to get more people onboarded onto this issue, to understand the trajectory we're headed as a society, what we can expect in the next decade if we kind of keep going the way that we're going when it comes to surveillance, et cetera. And a lot of the work that we're doing is really educational awareness, getting more people on side. So that's just kind of like a background piece to introduce you to what we do. So for us, privacy is a cultural issue. I mean, it's a technological issue, it's an engineering issue, it's all of those things. We've got great builders that are involved with this community who are doing awesome things. I think the biggest obstacle, though, is the cultural issue, because ultimately what I've seen over my time exploring these tools, educating people about these tools, onboarding people to them, is a lot of this stuff comes and goes if they don't have the community to sustain it. And sustainability comes from people willing to work on this tech. It comes from people willing to support the tech. It comes from users who are actually willing to use the tech. It comes from people actually being able to pay themselves so that they can keep maintaining this tech. And so I've seen a lot of churn. I've seen a lot of amazing tools get built and then disappeared. And I think, hey, didn't we used to have, a tool for buying PDFs with crypto like a decade ago? And do we have that now? It seems these tools just kind of churn, and we lose them when we don't have that community support backing them. So I think it's so important to explore that community side and figure out how we build better communities and how we can keep this stuff sustainable. So just to kind of zoom out, the way I see things right now is surveillance is insane. We have had crazy mandates that are just adding more and more roadblocks in front of a free internet. We're putting more permissioned gateways in place before people can actually interact with each other online. We're mandating IDs. We are putting age verification checks. We're using AI to infer things about people and then blocking their access if they're, if for some reason a platform doesn't want that type of person on. And so this stuff is ramping up. It's not disappearing. It's going to get worse and worse. The surveillance around the internet, it's very much an effort that is one-sided. And really, this community that is in the privacy space is really the only backstop, stopping kind of the surveillance state and corporate surveillance and all of this, just running away with all that internet freedom. So this community matters a lot. The way I see it is we basically need to build this underground railroad of privacy tools so that when all of these mandates eventually get passed, and I think it's a matter of time. Chat control just keeps getting introduced over and over. It doesn't matter whether the EU votes for it or not, just keeps getting introduced, and they get further and closer to actually being passed. So it's a matter of time before this stuff slides through. And what then? Do we lose access to all the amazing decentralized tech that people have built? I mean, the whole premise of decentralized tech, the value proposition is that is decentralized. There's no target that governments can shut down if they don't want you to use it. But unfortunately, what we've seen is that if people don't know how to use the internet privately, then it doesn't matter if a protocol is decentralized, if a protocol is censorship resistant. If governments don't want people using them, they can just target the people. And so people need to understand how to use the internet privately in order to safeguard these freedoms that have emerged around this new paradigm of decentralized technology. And so I think that right now we need to be laying that foundation and onboarding as many people as possible and proliferating these tools and getting them into as many hands as possible, because if a shutdown comes along, we need people to know that these tools exist and still have access. There may come a time when I can no longer have a channel educating people about this stuff and teaching them how to use it and all of that. So what I would love is for this content to already be out there on decentralized protocols, so it's always available. But what's more important than that is, like, even if it's out there on some decentralized protocol, if no one knows about it, then they don't know to access it and they don't know that these freedoms are possible. And so it's really important right now to make that culture shift around privacy and these issues, because we want to onboard people, many people as possible, onto this issue so that they at least know what to look for. If things get bad, they at least know what kind of information they should be seeking and what kind of technology will give them back their freedom eventually. So, we really identified at Ludlow early on that privacy is this big cultural issue. And the scary thing is that it may be like the biggest obstacle. And we're up against a lot of adversaries here. So, when it comes to privacy, first of all, we started to use this shameful language around it. What have you got to hide? As if privacy is about like hiding things you should be ashamed of. And that's really seeped into the culture. I think it's a giant propaganda campaign. And there are a lot of entrenched interests that don't want people to have privacy. So governments don't want to know about the surveillance that they're doing. Corporations don't want you to know about the surveillance that they're doing. People are largely in the dark, and because they don't understand what's going on, they feel like this isn't a pressing issue. And so it's really a matter of shifting that culture back, first of all, through educational awareness. I found that it's not that people don't care about privacy, it's that they have no idea what's going on. So as soon as you educate them and show them what's going on, they do care. They don't want this stuff to happen. And so education is kind of that first part of the culture shift, letting people understand the current situation. And then it's, once they understand it, trying to get them involved, like how can they participate in making this situation better? And also showing them like this trajectory that we're headed in. How do we change that course? How do we not hurtle full speed towards some dystopian surveillance panopticon, and instead shift the trajectory of where we're headed and write a better future? Invest in the technologies that are helping us, support the tools that are trying to protect us instead of exploit us, push back against the bad legislation that's trying to undermine our freedoms, all of that kind of stuff. So for me, it's really a cultural issue, and community is everything in this, because we could make as many tools as we want, but if no one is using them because they feel that they have nothing to hide, we've already lost the game. So I think there are a few things that we could do when addressing this and trying to build community around this. I think that first of all, like finding ways to combat these narratives is really important. So we've put out a lot of videos where we're exploring a lot of these myths around privacy. And one of them is this "I've got nothing to hide" myth. I get that all the time. I don't know if anyone watching, if that's also your least favorite saying, but it is one of mine, because I think it comes from people who are really naive, but they're also, they're really just parroting things that they've heard. This is just a common phrase, "I have nothing to hide." And I think that to combat that, first of all, it's helpful to remind them that they don't exist in a vacuum. Sometimes it's actually not about them. I can feel like my information is not super important, and maybe my emails aren't super important and all of that. And we'll address why that's naive later. But even if I feel that my personal information isn't that important and worth protecting, I have to remember that I'm part of a society, that has self-correcting mechanisms, and those self-correcting mechanisms stop working without privacy. So I am benefiting just by living my normal life from whistleblowers and investigative journalists and dissidents and opposition party members and protesters and all of these different sectors of society that demand privacy in order to do their job safely. And I benefit from them because I get to live in a society that has these self-correcting mechanisms, and this stuff all kind of works without even me being involved with it, because there are people in society who feel that this is important to focus on. So the question becomes not whether I have anything to hide, it's whether I want to live in a society where privacy is no longer possible for anyone. It's whether I want my children to live in a society where they no longer have the option of privacy. And so then it becomes a different framing of this. It's no longer about whether I can be bothered to use a better email provider that, protects people rather than exploits them, or whether I want to feed their opposition and feed their market competition and fuel the surveillance state. Instead, it becomes a question of whether I want to contribute to a future where we no longer have the option of privacy anymore, because we've been so busy fueling the competitors who, exploit people instead of actually supporting the people building the privacy tools. And that's the biggest battle I think that we come up against as a society, is mobilizing community members to care enough to make those switches when they don't feel personally affected. So at the end of the day, I think that combating these myths is super important, and just reminding people that their choices matter can go a long way. First of all, they're more empowered than they realize. A lot of people think that privacy is dead. Why bother? It's just not true. But second of all, they have more responsibility than they realize. Every choice that they make, they can choose to give their money to companies that are not doing good things, or support the companies that are trying to help people. If you're like giving all of your money to the people who are doing bad things, how on earth are the companies that are building the tools that try to protect people meant to compete? They just can't. They go out of business because no one is using their stuff, because everyone thinks they have nothing to hide. And that's kind of the inertia that we're fighting against here. A lot of people automatically signed up to Gmail when it came along, because they were never explicitly told when they created their account, hey, this is just going to be a profiling tool where we will analyze every personal communication you ever make and flag it, and then feed it into systems that we will then send this fire hose of information to thousands of entities who will profile you and manipulate you and do all these things. And we're just going to give that to government as well. No one would have signed up for it if that were explicitly laid out. Instead, we just thought, well, this is a free email thing. I don't really understand what the internet is. I'll sign up for this. And now fast forward to 2026, everyone's on Gmail, and there's that baked in inertia. Everyone feels like they've built their entire social graph on this communication tool, and they can't switch over now. It's too late. So we really need to remind people that every single day that they continue to feed these existing systems, now that we understand what they're actually about, there's no excuse in terms of, ignorance. We understand what these systems are doing, and every day we continue to feed them. We are feeding the competitors of the people we actually want to see succeed. So it's all about reminding people that they actually have responsibility in their choices, and are they feeding a good future, or are they feeding a bad future? So that's one of the reasons why we really focus on educating people about this, because we want them to understand the role that they have. We want them to understand that actually they are an important part of creating a better future. We can't just leave this up to all the people who are technologists or engineers, or maybe we leave it up to legislators and hope that someone comes to save us. Actually, we all have a role to play in our choices. And that's a big thing that we focus on in our work. So then there's also the fact that privacy is very different from every other community. So let's explore that. Like, everyone wants to build communities for all kinds of things, for sporting engagements, or for, pop culture things. Maybe there's book clubs, or maybe there's, school networks, whatever they are. There are all kinds of communities that we like to build. But privacy actually is unlike all of them. It's very different, because privacy is all about the anonymity set. So generally, when someone joins a community, they're just adding momentum to a movement. In privacy, every person who joins adds cover. they actually contribute to the safety of other people using those privacy tools. And I think that's a really important distinction. So like that means that for the privacy community, like this sense of community isn't just something that helps build momentum and is good. Like it's actually part of the infrastructure. The community is the infrastructure of privacy. And so we want as many people as possible to be using these systems, because at the end of the day, if there's one person in the world, using Tor, it's not that helpful, right? If there's one person in a shielded pool, it's not that helpful. The more people that we can add to these anonymity sets, the better, which makes privacy fundamentally different. So I talked a little bit about like contributing and how we want these tools to be sustainable. So one of the things that I tend to look at in our communities is giving people a bunch of options for how they can contribute, because our community in particular is a wide swath of people. So we've got absolute beginners who were, they'll watch a video about how Gmail is spying on you and they're shocked. Oh my God, I had no idea that Google was reading my emails. So they're right at the start of their privacy journey. And then you've got people right at the other end who, will send me emails, with tiny, tiny little nuanced counterpoints because they're deep in the tech of the stuff that we're talking about. And they're helping educate me about, all of the things that should be on my radar. And so a wide variety of people, and they all have different ways they can contribute to this movement. So I'll lay out some of the ways that I think people can be contributing depending on their skill set. If you are technical, obviously contributing to a lot of these projects is great. I have people sometimes ask me, hey, I got offered a job at XYZ company and I really don't like their values. And, should I take this job or should I, try to find something else? It's a really hard question to answer. And I think it'll come down to how easily you're able to find work. I wouldn't say no to a job if you're, you're really looking for a job. I think it's important to take what's there. If you're someone who does have choices though, and there are lots of people vying for you, I think that it could be helpful to look at the tools that you think most align with your value system and to put your skills towards those projects, because we need you. We need more people like you. So yeah, contributing if you can. And if you do end up taking a job with a company that maybe they're not value aligned or something like that, remember that you also have other hours of the day or time that you could contribute to other things. So like open source projects, for example, you may want to use that other time to contribute to those. Maybe you can't get a sustainable job in that, but maybe you could still find ways to contribute. So that's something to consider. If you're not technical, there are all kinds of ways that you can contribute. So one of the things that we have the MBTV members chat on Signal. So anyone who becomes a member at Ludlow, they get access to this chat that I just adore, because it's this vibrant community of people who, they're all there to learn, but a lot of them are there to share their experiences as well. And so we have people who are trying out new tools, and some people are asking questions, and, other community members are able to field them. Some people are giving tips. Hey, I just signed up for this thing. Did you know that this happens? Here's how you can protect yourself. You have people who are now writing their own blog posts and sharing those. It just becomes this wonderful space for people to participate and share what they've learned and ask for advice. And they kind of had this inbuilt network of aligned people who understand the issues, have solidarity, and can empathize with these situations. And they also are sharing resources. So this is something that can be done outside of any sort of like members chat or a group chat like that. We could extrapolate from this and apply this to any of the tools out there. Like a lot of the open source tools out there need more people to use them and to give feedback about the UX. Maybe they're not catching all the bugs. They probably would appreciate you contributing pull requests or something like that. They could appreciate you going into their community forums and giving feedback so that they know what's going on. I've found that a lot of companies have been really receptive when I've given suggestions. Like, for example, Signal, they have their username feature that they added recently. And I've had a 100% failure rate with getting people onto username. I mean, 100% failure rate with people searching for me. If they have not used the username function and I give them my username, they will immediately go to that universal search bar within Signal and type in my username, because that's where you'd expect to search for someone's username. Signal has this weird UX where that's not actually where you search for universal usernames. That was a local search, and a lot of people didn't realize that. You were just searching your local chat history and your local contacts when you used that search field. To add someone's username on Signal, you had to go to compose. So when you first meet someone, you're like, oh yeah, let's share Signal. You actually have to go and write a message, and only then can you search by someone's username. So like that was something that I brought to the CTO a little while ago. Like, hey, this is some experience from onboarding like hundreds of people onto this. It may be something you would consider, and that's the type of feedback that can be really helpful if you're building these tools and you're unsure how users are actually interacting with them. Getting that feedback and having an area where there's some sort of a forum where people can actually give you that feedback and give suggestions can be so helpful, because then you understand like how to make it better. And a lot of the people building this stuff do just want to make this stuff better. I would also say when you're giving feedback, like don't be an asshole. It's a really great tip right there. I get two types of emails to me. One of them is, Naomi, you're a horrendous person in the world because you didn't talk about this thing that I like, or you got this one thing wrong, or you're, awful and should die of cancer, or, people will write with such vitriol when they have feedback. And you can bet that I just don't read those emails. There's another type of email that I get that says, hey, I really appreciate the time that you're putting into putting out this free educational content. Here is some suggestions of things that you could cover, or here is something that may not be on your radar that's helpful, or here is something that, I think this is a good way of framing it that you may want to use in future videos. I love those emails. I relish smart people writing to me and giving me feedback, because I think that with that support, we all grow and we all get better. And I don't want to be an island where I'm just having to rely on myself. Like I can absolutely have tremendous room to grow and improve from people much smarter than me giving me feedback. But I think we have to be mindful of how we present feedback. I, unfortunately, see a huge number of people online in the comments on Twitter. There'll be tech projects, and instead of giving that tech project feedback that would actually be helpful, they're just looking for an opportunity to flex and get some sort of like social brownie point. They just want to be seen as like, being smart. They made a point, they made a dunk on someone, and it makes them feel smart and it makes them feel good. It doesn't get us anywhere as a privacy community to do that stuff. And I really implore you to never do that stuff. There is always a nicer way that you can frame things when you are interacting with people online. If you have feedback that will help someone's project, or if you're skeptical about a project and you want more, questions, like don't lead with your skepticism and demand that you're entitled to that person explaining themselves to you. Like there are much better ways to frame these that can actually grow this movement and build bridges. I think that we have too many enemies to be focusing on schisms between different privacy focused people. So that's a big tip that I would give to people. Anytime that you're giving like public feedback or sending an email to someone, lead with kindness and benefit of the doubt. It may turn out that actually the team on the receiving end, maybe they are doing something bad or whatever, but don't lead with that presumption. I think we can get a lot further. Maybe their bandwidth is really stretched. Maybe there are other reasons that are not public that they might be doing things the way that they're doing that you don't know about. Maybe you don't have all of the context. And so just giving them the benefit of the doubt and leading with kindness, I think can go a really long way to that community building. I will give a shout out. So like, I think that a really great group that is doing some great community building right now. So Web3 privacy, they spoke at the start of this conference today, but one of the values that they're leading with is like when, they're not going to be project specific. They solicit suggestions from everyone in the privacy space, everyone even orthogonal to the privacy space, adjacent, somewhat related, and they get everyone to pitch their own tech stack because they understand that everyone has their own value system and their own priorities and the tools that they're using, and they want to hear what all of the people are doing. And so I think that the fact that they are tool agnostic is really powerful, because what they're doing is they're identifying that the way to unite people is under this common premise. Like, we all care about privacy. All right, so that's the uniting part. Do we have to have schisms about which privacy tool is best? Maybe this isn't the right forum for it, right? Maybe we're just here to unite people with the culture of privacy, and it's okay that people use different tools. And I really like that. I think that we can get very tribal. It's human nature, unfortunately, but I think that this is exacerbated in an era where there's so much polarization online. And so we have to be pretty mindful of that kind of polarization working its way into everything that we do. Like, if we agree 99% on people, do we have to have roaring arguments with them, or can we just find the way to work together on that 99%? I think is the focus here. And I will mention, when it comes to polarization, a lot of people don't realize that this polarized world, a lot of it has come about because of surveillance. When entities know so much about you, when they collect so much data about you, they know exactly how to push your buttons. And unfortunately, a lot of these sites that we participate in are engagement driven, and you get the most engagement when people are outraged. And that's just the current reality of things. We have systems that understand exactly how to push our buttons. They are purposely trying to enrage us in order to create engagement. This is just like an awful spiral right there that we again kind of have to step out from and remind ourselves, when we're seeing these comments that add fuel to our internal rage. Maybe just, again, taking a moment, first of all, ask the question, is the person I'm engaging with even a human? Right now, it's quite possible that they're just a bot that is literally being deployed to create these fractures in certain communities. So take a moment and just ask that question. And then also take a moment to just remember the humanity of the person on the other side. When we're interacting with like a digital screen, we lose so much of the data that as humans we've evolved to value. Those little micro expressions, the certain intonation changes, the things that you only really get in meat space. We've lost a lot of it, and it makes a lot of our engagements very two-dimensional. And again, sometimes it just becomes a clout contest. We're not engaging because we actually want to engage with people. Sometimes it's just that we want to dunk and score like social, brownie points. And so I think that if we really want to build community in the privacy space, which is so important right now, given like the context of everything going on globally around surveillance, I think we need to not lose our humanity when we're dealing with people. We need to interact with people, remembering that there are humans on the other side of these conversations, and just try to really try to find the ways that you overlap with their interests rather than the areas where you disagree. Try to find those agreement points, because we can build on those. We can build on agreements. If we're just focused on the ways where we disagree, we can't do anything. We just all end up as different parts. But together, the sum can be greater than the total is the greater than the sum of all the parts, right? So I think that there's tremendous value in that solidarity and coming together. So I really implore people to try to find the areas where we do have that overlapping agreeing. And on that side, just circling back to the current war being waged against privacy, it is a war. There are privacy developers being thrown in jail for writing open source tools. There are government mandates trying to be passed all over the world. Some countries are having more success than others, that are trying to strip us of the right to have privacy online. They're trying to mandate backdoors and everything. They are trying to ban end-to-end encryption. There is a real war against privacy going on right now. So the siege is real. I think as a community, we need to keep our eyes on the prize. There's a lot of temptation for internal bickering and for, finding different, I want this project. Well, I want this project. And so now we're at war. I think that is what our enemies want us to do. And they will throw fuel on every tiny hint of fragmentation in the community possible, because they do not want the privacy community to be united at all. And so they're looking for these fractures in the community, and they are fueling them. You can bet that they are fueling them. So really, we want as a community to be very mindful of that and just not buy into it. Sometimes it can actually be better to have private conversations with people, to work out disagreements, than making it a public spat where it ends up just building tribes and all that. Maybe a lot of this stuff doesn't have to be political, but I do think that across the entire privacy ecosystem, and I see this again across different cryptocurrencies, across different tools, across it's insane how political the privacy space is for such a small group of people, right? But I do worry about that fracturing. We have a common enemy that we need to not forget about. And the common enemy is anyone who wants to take our privacy from us. And so we can have disagreements and we can have differences in opinion about what the best methods are for us to fight against that enemy and to make sure that individuals retain the right to privacy, because privacy is really the foundation of a free society. So we want to work really hard to maintain that. But I think that, yeah, a lot, the enemies of privacy are really well organized. The enemies of privacy are making a lot of headway. Technology has really been hijacked in recent decades for surveillance purposes without people catching up in building privacy tools with this technology as well, right? The pace at which our privacy has been stripped from us far outpaces, the pace at which we're building privacy tools and forming communities. And it's so easy to fracture that community and then make those projects move even slower. So I just want us to keep our eyes on the prize. We have a common enemy. The enemy is anyone who's trying to strip us of our right to privacy. And if there are ways where we can kind of put ego aside and just focus on that, focus on the person that we can all, work together to combat, I think we're going to get so much further. We are really at risk as our movement gets larger, and it is getting larger. That's the exciting thing. I'm seeing, over the last several years, 5 years ago, I'm fundraising for this new nonprofit that I'm building, privacy. And everyone's like, why do I care about privacy? It was real hard. It was real hard to try to convince people, hey, this is something you should care about. But fast forward to 2026, people are getting it. Major news outlets are getting it. We are building this momentum. So that's really great that more people are coming on board. But the fragility of that community never disappears. It doesn't matter how large you get. It is so easy to fracture community. And I think we really need to keep that in mind as we fight this battle. Don't let them fracture us. There are people who are focused on these, as I said, these tiny hints of fragments and fractures, and they're adding fuel to that fire. We need to be so resolute in our mission and remember that the mission is higher than any individual disagreement among us. The mission is protecting privacy. The mission is protecting privacy for future generations, for our current generation, making sure that privacy is always an option. That's the mission. And sometimes we get lost in the weeds with, interpersonal differences, and sometimes there's ego and, we don't like to be embarrassed and, we lash out. And I'm absolutely, guilty of this more often than I should be. It's a constant thing that I struggle with. And I think all of us struggle with, but I think it is a really important thing for us to work on improving, because if we let ego come in and it becomes more about us winning a personal battle, I think we lose as a society. This is kind of an existential moment for us where I feel like we have a limited window where we can fortify the privacy tools that we have before a wave of mandates start to be rolled out, and start blocking those opportunities. And so this is the time where we'll just like forget that kind of political nonsense and just stick together and just get as far as we can. Like, we have to move as fast as we can right now, and we can't do that if we're constantly trying to trip each other up. So that's just another thing I wanted to mention as we're focused on community building, is just keeping our eyes on the prize. This battle against privacy, this siege, is real, and it's scary, and we really need to work together to fight that. So one thing I've noticed recently, and I don't know whether we wanted to go into any audience questions this and after, but I don't know if there have been any. But one tool that that is helpful for me is just repetition. And so I would encourage you all, as you're figuring out, how do I better communicate privacy? How do I make people understand this is important? Repetition is great. I find that when someone hears something once, privacy is important, they dismiss it if it's something that is not familiar to them. And then you tell them again, privacy is important. And they're like, oh, I've heard that before, but I still don't agree with it. You tell them again, privacy is important. And they say, I've heard that before. And then you tell them again, privacy is important. And they say, yeah, I've heard that before. It resonates with me. It's very familiar to them at this stage. You repeat something enough times, and eventually people just start thinking that it was their idea. And so I found that, like, across social media and all of these things, just like keep repeating the same statements about how surveillance undercuts a free society, how it stops these self-correcting mechanisms from existing, how privacy is kind of the bulwark of our rights, how it is the foundation of a free society. You keep telling people this stuff enough, and eventually, maybe it takes years, but they start to resonate with it. And so that's one of the big battles we can fight on the cultural and communal front right now, getting enough people to not be afraid to repeat this stuff. I have people, it's so exciting when people tell me, like, hey, I went to a restaurant and they asked for my number and I told them no. And I'm like, that's an epic win because they felt brave enough. It seems so silly. It's this tiny little thing, but they felt brave enough normalizing their own privacy boundaries. They don't want to give away their number, but they kind of feel this social obligation. Oh, well, it's accepted. It's normalized. I'll just go along with it because I don't want to create a hassle. And so to see people start to have their own privacy boundaries and feel brave enough to exercise them, is really great. So just normalizing that, the more conversations you can kind of get into. Again, don't be an asshole, but sometimes it's okay to stand up for your rights and very nicely and kindly explain it. I find that I walk a fine line. There are two ways that I fight this battle in my life when I'm dealing with, like, the external community. And I have to, again, think of what is my mission here. Now, sometimes my mission is just to get through an appointment with as little friction as possible. And so I may choose something different than when my mission is to take this as an educational opportunity, see if I can convert someone. So here are my two approaches. If I'm just getting through the day and trying to get through friction of an appointment or something, and someone asks for information that I don't want to give, I actually figure out how to achieve my aim in that situation. If they want a phone number and I know that they're going to keep asking and demanding and tell me that it's absolutely essential, okay, I'll find a socially acceptable reason why I can't give it. I won't talk about my rights. I'll just say, oh, I don't have a working number right now. I will talk about how maybe my phone's broken or maybe my plan has run out or something. That's a socially acceptable reason. The person will understand this. So they'll move on. They'll say, oh, well, just circle back when you get one and we'll add it in later. In some situations, if you make a stand and you're like, no, I don't want to give you your number, you get people who will dig their heels in and they will say, well, you have to do it in order to have this appointment, or we need that, or like, this is just data that we're going to force you to give away. So again, if my mission is just to get through an appointment with as little friction as possible, I'm just going to do what it takes. And sometimes that requires phrasing things in a way that is socially palatable. But there are other opportunities where it's not so high stakes and I can actually use it as an educational opportunity. And those are great exercises for normalizing privacy. So there are some situations where, someone will say like, what's your email address? And I'll give them an email address that is like, some alias that has their name in it, the Flora's flower shop or something at simplelogin.com. And they'll be like, that's your email address? It's a great teaching moment right now. It's like, yeah, I actually use an alias service. So I give every merchant that I interact with a different email address. It just helps me keep track of them. It helps me see who's sending me spam. It helps me note when my data's been sold. It just is a really great tool in the digital age for really taking control of my data. And just little opportunities like that. Again, I'm not being an asshole or anything. I'm not being confrontational. Just taking the opportunity to kind of explain to someone, oh yeah, these are things that you can use. And actually they're really, really helpful. So I would say as you go about your life, when you're wanting to build community, sometimes you're not going to build community if you're in a high stakes situation and you like steadfast refuse to budge on something. You're not going to convince that person. You're not going to help normalize privacy as a good thing. They're just going to think privacy people are assholes, and you're not going to get your way. They're probably going to force you to do whatever it is they want you to do. So choose your battles and identify when it's a situation where someone's going to be receptive. And if they are receptive, then find a way to start to normalize privacy as a choice, and privacy as something that people can consciously opt into. So I found a lot of success in that. I will pay with cash as often as I can when I'm out with friends, and everyone puts down a credit card, and I will take out my little wallet, pouch and feed out the money. And stuff like that just kind of reminds people that there are different ways that they can interact in a situation. It may be easier to put out a card and everyone just does it to reduce that social friction. We want to help normalize actually making privacy choices is also an acceptable thing. It's okay to have those boundaries and opt for different things in that situation. I think that just kind of choosing those moments and trying to again, eyes on the prize. What is your mission in this? If the mission is to actually have a teaching moment and try to use this as an opportunity to convince someone, make them a convert, being an asshole and just laying down the law and telling them that you demand your rights is not going to win them over. There are better ways to frame that narrative. So
I got a quick question.
yeah.
Some of the best or some of the folks that are best in privacy, they're surprisingly hard to find because their culture is in privacy. So what do you recommend, like the discoverability? How do you find these communities who are necessarily underground?
So start again from that. It's talking about like what kind of communities are they after? Just like people who are sharing information about this stuff, sharing advice, that kind of thing.
Just any community that's maybe off the radar that values privacy in general. They tend to be very hard to find, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. And I think that that discoverability is part of the education problem is people don't realize they exist. And I'm curious on how do you connect with these folks? How do you find them so that they can share their knowledge? Because clearly they're doing something right if no one can find them.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, so that's a great question. I personally got into all of these just by starting small and then growing my network from there. So starting from people like Michael Basil and his amazing podcast that he used to have. And that's how I kind of learned about a lot of this stuff. There are some great channels out there and great platforms that are providing resources for people and are very public. Web3 Privacy Now is one of them, and they just launched, a platform where you can search for different tools and try to find exactly what you're looking for. I think that using those guides that exist online as your jumping off point is a great place to start. A lot of them have built-in forums, so there are YouTube channels out there that have some really great forums. There's like, I think it's Tech Law has like a privacy wins channel where like people share their privacy wins, which is like a cool thing. We have our communities on Signal, and then we've got another one on Simple X, which is a public channel people can join. I think identifying the more public ones will then allow you to join groups and participate to find the more nuanced and niche ones. We've had so many spin-off groups since I've started my NBTV members chat. We now have like a preppers group that someone started because we started talking about all of the actual physical privacy stuff, you know. And then we realized maybe it was too focused for this to be in like a general chat. So we've like had spin-off groups come from that. We have like a graphene install group that we have specifically because so many people are installing graphene from our videos, that having a dedicated Signal group that people can join to ask questions if they want to do the install was tremendously important. And so I think that, yeah, you just start from the very public sites out there that provide these resources, and you can just work your way into the more niche groups from there. I think that right now we're in a good place because we have those publicly accessible guides. That's why I kind of talk about this window of opportunity we have to kind of set up the infrastructure for this underground railroad. I'm not sure this will always be the case, right? If you go to China right now and if you're living there and you're trying to find these same privacy tools, you're going to have a much harder time because they have this firewall up that stops you accessing a lot of this stuff. They have all kinds of like monitoring on every communication platform in the country that is stopping people from proliferating these kinds of tools. That's the kind of situation that we should be very wary is coming our way, which is why we want to get this stuff into as many people's hands as we can now. We want to proliferate these tools now because there may come a time when these public privacy guides no longer exist. Maybe, you know, it's a DNS block that the government has implemented. You already have governments, you know, responding to lawsuits such as, you know, Sony versus Quad 9, where they've literally blocked the DNS like of Quad like they sued Quad 9 for basically retrieving IP addresses from URLs and DNS queries because they were part of the infrastructure of the internet. But Sony said, well, no, you're giving people IP addresses for like pirating websites and things like that. And they're like, we're just infrastructure. We're not doing anything. Like, we don't even have clients. Sony won the lawsuit. You already have governments around the world literally targeting the infrastructure of the internet. So there may come a time where they decide privacy is too dangerous. Cryptocurrency is too dangerous. All of this stuff is banned. You can no longer resolve a URL to an IP address. And we no longer have these public guides. I think that we need to have some pretty robust communities being set up now so people are already in these networks. Because at the end of the day, if someone's already using this decentralized tooling and they know how to use the internet privately, they're going to be fine. The problem is that 99% of the population is not going to be fine. And that's going to be the society we all have to live in as part of. So we want to bring as many people on board as possible right now, get them to learn about this stuff so they know where the resources are, so that when this stuff finally, you know, if it ever gets to a situation where that communication, that sharing of information gets stifled, we still have options. We still have a glimmer of hope to turn things around.
Great. This kind of leads us into our next question by Alchemy DC. It's a little more direct, and it's related in the sense that it's an AI base, which is kind of the counterpart of privacy. He asked, what are best practices for privately leveraging the power of AI? Do I need to spend a fortune on hardware in order to local inference? And do you trust Confer or Venice? What other providers do you recommend for private cloud AI? So it kind of centralizes on the AI topic.
Yeah. Great question. So there's definitely a spectrum when it comes to AI. I use everything across the spectrum currently. You know, there are better tools that tend to be less good for privacy, but maybe it's for a public video that I'm putting out there. So I'm okay, you know, if this is all public, maybe I'm okay with using that. I really like to use these middle ground ones. So you mentioned confer.to and Venice.ai. So that's a middle ground because you're not doing the compute locally on your computer. You're using someone else's computer. But there are different privacy precautions built in. So we can look at the kind of nuances. Again, there's a wide swath of different privacy protections there. Locally, I run AI locally as well. I can only really run like a 7 billion parameter model on my computer. It's going to be slower than everything else. It's not going to be as good. But long story short, you don't need to spend a ton of money to run things locally. You can set this up with what you currently have with a consumer level hardware and have like a pretty good tool. I'm thinking about 2026 level AI. So I'm looking at what's possible now, which is like insanely good. The stuff I can do locally on my computer was the insanely good stuff of like 3 years ago. That was the stuff where at the time we were like, this is crazy. So still absolutely worth it to have that stuff running. I know of at least 4 companies that are coming out with kind of plug and play boxes that are pretty reasonably priced hardware setups where they already have models installed. They will automatically update. They will kind of keep this thing maintained for you. And they look really like these kinds of toolings. I don't know any that have been released consumer ready yet, but I know many companies that have written to me and being like, hey, this is in the works and I'm waiting for it. I'm waiting for them to release. I'm absolutely going to be buying a bunch of them, trying them out. I'll let you know, which ones I think are easier. I think the hardest thing with running AI locally is updates. Updates are a nightmare when you're dealing with like Docker containers. It's you set this stuff up, but like it's really hard to kind of maintain this stuff. So just keep that in mind. If you have like a spare computer that you don't really use for anything else, it may be worthwhile kind of just setting this stuff up so that if you're not like connecting to the internet, updates don't become as important for that. That may be something that you might want to consider. In the middle ground, there are some really cool options. So something that I use frequently is Brave's Leo. So it is built straight into the Brave browser. The reason why I like that is because Brave has really good no logging policies, and I really like the team. And Leo is really great at answering questions. So when I do searches, I just have Leo enabled, and it'll kind of give me summaries and all kinds of things. So there are immediate things that I trust in there. They're not keeping like sessions on their end at all. It is all local. So you, within a single session, kind of keep that history. And then when you exit out, it just deletes any record of that. So I would say Leo is a really, really useful tool if you're not already using it. Venice is definitely improved over the years. So Venice is a bit complicated because they build themselves as kind of this AI tool, this kind of monolith. AI is really the front end infrastructure of their AI platform. They originally started as like a decentralized AI platform. The idea was to have censorship resistant AI, which is really valuable, awesome. Like I applaud that mission. But it can be antithetical to privacy in some ways. So for example, they had a lot of great privacy precautions for the front end, but a lot of things that people didn't realize is when they send that request out, they didn't have control over the logging policies of whoever was doing the compute on the back end. And they were using kind of like things like a cache, like an Airbnb for GPU compute on the back end. So you really didn't know who was collecting that information. So one thing that I let people know when they use it, I use it all the time, just for the record, but I just am careful not to dox myself. Knowing that whoever does the compute can get access, can see the query, was something that made me not give away my name, for example, not give away like my home address, not give away like donor information, things like that. I had more trust in something like Brave, where I knew the logging policy of the people doing the compute. And in Venice, because I just didn't know that, like if Venice itself was doing the compute itself, I probably would have had a much higher trust of that system, because if they have a no logging policy, I'd probably trust it because I like the team. They've actually changed since then. So they are now doing private compute, and private compute again is this kind of spectrum that is not super clear. I actually have an interview coming up soon with an awesome cryptographer Ash, and we're going to be talking about like TEs, secure enclaves, all of these things, because you hear a lot of buzzwords about like how do you create encrypted inference? How do you make it so that your query is not accessible to the computer that's actually running that inference? And it's really difficult, even with the secure enclaves and TEs. There are, like, depending on the implementation, some are better than others, and I'm not sure that any of them are 100%. There is always going to be that that trust there. If you're doing it on someone else's machine, can they get access to it? So I would say that there are some tools in the middle here that you can have pretty good privacy boundaries. And if you're comparing it to something like ChatGPT and Claude and all of that, absolutely, the stuff in the middle is great. You get access to all the latest models. I can use Opus on Venice, and it's really, really good. And you're getting much better privacy precautions. All I like to do is make sure people have a realistic expectation of the privacy they're actually getting. So when I use Brave's Leo, there is a trust element. I am trusting their logging policy. When I use Venice, I'm trusting the implementation of them doing this secure compute. There's a lot of trust when you use anything in this mid-ground, but I think that it's really great stuff. Highly recommend that if you haven't integrated some of these platforms, you should. One thing I like about Confer, I like Moxie, obviously. I think that he's great. And so I kind of I'm very interested in anything that he is working on. I've been trying out Confer, and I really like you can ingest your entire ChatGPT history into Confer, which is great because, again, like I mentioned earlier with like Gmail, we kind of had this inertia. We kind of get locked in to these systems. We feel like we've built up agents on certain platforms and they have history and they know how I like things and that I hate M dashes and all of that. But when you use something like Confer, you can just ingest that history, and that becomes something that that Confer can reference. So you don't lose all of that kind of training that you may have done on these systems. So that's kind of the spectrum of this stuff. I will just give like a giant warning of everything on the far end, the perplexities and the ChatGPTs and the Claudes and all of that. These are absolutely there's direct line of communication with law enforcement with these. People need to understand that everything they are writing not only is attributable to them in a centralized account that they have signed up for and given their phone number, but they're also flagging and analyzing these queries in real time, and they are notifying law enforcement of anything that's suspicious. This gets dangerous because anything can be taken out of context, and AI is not yet good at understanding that context. And there have been so many cases of things being flagged, and this is strange. Like, this is all data that, again, is being sent to law enforcement as like flags. Like, I saw someone in one of the groups that I was in got a letter from the FBI because their gun license had been rejected, and the reason cited was LLM queries, something like ChatGPT questions that have been asked. So something about, like, they'd asked about medical marijuana, and they'd mentioned being depressed. And, we're using these things as our, psychologist and therapist and medical provider and all of this stuff. We're using LLMs for very personal things. But because this person had mentioned drug use and a state of mind where they were feeling depressed, they were denied. And that's kind of shocking that we literally have these direct lines of communication with law enforcement. So just a big flag there. If you're, an immigrant and you're looking up immigration status stuff, that stuff might be taken out of context to deny you a visa. If you are setting up a company and you're asking, like, what's the best way to do this, that might be flagged by the IRS because now they're saying you're trying to evade taxes or something by the way you phrase something. Even if these things are not true at all, this stuff can all be used against you. And we've seen in trials like Roman Storm, if you watched his trial, the number of things where they just took his chat logs and took things completely out of context. People can paint whatever picture they want with all the fragments of your life. And so if you are giving more and more fragments of your life to these centralized systems that are attributable to you, you are handing over a tremendous amount of power and it's going to be very dangerous if anyone decides to like scrutinize or look closely, or if you ever become problematic, become a protester, dissident, anything. So just be aware, this stuff gets taken out of context. You should be very wary of just handing complete access to your most personal conversations.
Okay, yeah, I actually got another question in relation to this. Elise asked, what should people be auditing on their own devices right now to possibly limit passive AI data collection? Is that even possible? And maybe you can explain if you know how to do it, maybe at a basic level.
Yeah, that's a great question. Depends what operating system you're on. So the computer I'm currently using is a Mac. Um, I use it because Adobe is part of my everyday tooling. I am a video editor by profession, and so I use the Adobe suite. Adobe is total spyware. It's insane how much access it asks for and how many servers it tries to connect to. The reason I know this is because I use Little Snitch. So Little Snitch is like a reverse firewall. Generally, you know, firewalls will stop like incoming traffic. Little Snitch is there to basically notify you of any outgoing traffic. What programs on my computer are trying to ping random servers? Where are they trying to ping? What sites are these used for? Can we tell anything about the IP addresses? So Little Snitch will basically, if you have it on a mode that sends you alerts in real time, it will send you the IP address, the program that is trying to link to it. It will show you a map of where it estimates that IP address is located, and it will tell you something about the program that is like requesting this. It's it's so jargony. I get these things, and half the time I don't even know whether to accept the connection or not. Like, if I deny it, is my computer going to break? You know, if I accept it, have I just let China, you know, monitor my communications? So I found that actually LLMs are an amazing use case for this. I screenshot that pop up, send it to the LLM. And I've told the LLM I'm a privacy preserving person. If this isn't going to break my machine, tell me that I can, you know, turn it off. And so the LLM will say, oh, well, this is to this advertising network. They're doing this, you know, because they're sharing data with this. If it absolutely will not break your computer, you can deny that request. So that's one of the tools that I use. I'm actually working on something to try to automate that process so I don't have to screenshot everything. I'm working on an integration so that's an automatic process. It'll just explain to me what these pop-ups are. But that's one example of how you can monitor the telemetry of your machine. By having one of these reverse firewalls monitor outbound traffic and like tell you, okay, well, which system process is doing that, which application process is trying to make that connection, where are they trying to make it, what do we know about the IP address? This is all stuff that can be instantly queried now that we have AI, and it's a great use case for trying to patch some of that outbound telemetry going on machines.
Awesome. We got another question from Gordones TV. What is the best way to teach someone about online safety? Yeah.
Okay. The best way to teach them about online safety. It depends whether you mean online safety or online privacy. They can be slightly different things. Let's talk about safety first, because that was the exact word you used. I have a friend who's working on a project about this right now, and it's brilliant. So one thing that that he does is he trains people how to spot scams. So when you're coming to safety, we have to understand that the current landscape is a minefield. It's a war zone out there. It has become easier than ever to mass deploy scams to the entire world with the click of a button. And these can be personally tailored scams. No longer general scams that are easily spottable, but we're talking spear phishing attacks against individualized people, because AI systems are able to aggregate data about us in bulk and then deploy things en masse, just instantaneously filling in, you know, personal information and things. So, you know, things like voice, like emulation is scary. You know, you could get a call from who you think is your brother, and they could be, you know, telling you all these bad things have happened. You need to send them money, and it might not be your brother at all. I think that a good way to train people on how to spot these scams is to put them in an adversarial role and have them try out, you know, try think in the mindset of the wolf themselves, right? Try to figure out If you were trying to trick someone, how would you do it? And it will make you more attuned to seeing those things in your life. You should absolutely have boundaries, like hardline boundaries, with like don't click on links in emails. It doesn't matter whether it's someone in your own team that sent it. You don't click on links in emails. That's a good boundary to have. You should have safe words with your family and friends. So if you do get a call and you think it's someone that you know, have a safe word, and you should decide on that safe word, ideally face to face if you can, or through a communication channel that you trust, and ideally has disappearing messages. But decide on that safe word. Make sure you set it up with everyone that you are close with. That's going to get more and more important. I think that for online privacy, the best way to teach people is to not start with the hard stuff. So we have like 700 videos on our channel. And these videos were created as I progressed along my privacy journey. So every video that we've done is something I've implemented in my life. And that means that, okay, I already did changing my browser, and that was years ago. And now I'm doing some like weird esoteric thing over here. The problem is people come to our channel and they'll start with that latest video. And I'm like, whoa, no. Go back to the start. Go back to the easy stuff. People will often look at some of this hard stuff I'm putting out and ask me questions about how to implement it. And I'm like, you're still writing me from a Gmail account. You should not be implementing that. You should be going back there and focused on email right now. I think that the best way to teach people about privacy is giving them the lowest hanging fruit possible for them to make changes in their life. They shouldn't be worrying about like how to do it perfectly, how to set up things absolutely anonymously, making things airtight. They should simply just be starting to take their things away from the companies that are harvesting their data and choosing better alternatives. So I would start with 5 things. I would start with email is a great one to start with. There's literally a button inside a lot of these providers where you can automatically ingest your entire email history or Yahoo history or AOL, whatever it is you use. There's generally a button that will just auto ingest that stuff. Browser. I would not be using Chrome. Everyone's using Chrome. Just switch to something that is better. Search engine. You should not be using Google search engine. Switch to something that is more privacy preserving. Messenger. Stop using SMS. Stop using social media DMs. You should not be giving these companies more data than they need. So switch to something that is end-to-end encrypted, and then choose a good VPN. So be careful of VPNs. Like the vast majority of them, I would argue, are data harvesting shell companies that are not trustworthy at all. But there are some VPNs that a lot of people kind of stand by, things like Mulvad. So choose something that is good. And those kind of the 5 things that I would start with. I wouldn't go any more complicated than that if you're just a beginner.
Great. We're getting a lot of questions. Thanks for keep them coming, guys. Squirrel ask, informing people on the risk of things like CBDCs can seem like doom and gloom. Have you found it necessary to balance this with positive messaging?
Always, yeah. I think there are a lot of channels that kind of get their kicks from just scaring people. I really like to give people actionable steps that they can take. First of all, tell them why this is a dangerous situation and, they should be concerned, but absolutely give them something to help them, a next step, because if we're just feeding people doom and gloom, it's just going to make people numb. We're going to end up with a society of people who think that there's nothing they do matters, and it's all awful and it's inevitable. It's not inevitable. We can absolutely make empowering choices that can change the landscape and change the trajectory. So yeah, absolutely always include advice like next steps, actionable, practical steps people can take to make a difference. With CBDCs, what are the practical steps? Well, we still got, in the US, we've got government still debating this stuff. So you can participate in that conversation. People are constantly asking, doing calls for comments, things like that. So participate. You could also be creating material, educational material about this to educate others. A lot of people still never even heard the term CBDC. They don't know what this stuff is. They don't understand it as well as you might. And so educating people, writing about this stuff, telling people goes a long way. I think that educational effort is one of the big things that we could be focused on right now. But then there's also alternatives, right? Governments may demand people use CBDCs for the white economy, but that will just mean that there are more gray economies that will be in the future where people are using cryptocurrencies and alternative financial systems because they realize that this is a tracking system and a system of control. They just don't want to participate. So reminding people about using cash, using other cryptocurrencies can be great tools to put in their back pocket when, if this stuff does come down the line in the future.
Awesome. I got a quick question just off the top of my head. You have a lot of amazing videos on your YouTube. And one of my favorites is your series on the automobiles and privacy. I think that's like really, really riveting. But I'm curious, what is your favorite video that you've ever made? Maybe you can explain why you like it.
Oh gosh. I'll tell you, it's not necessarily my favorite, but it was a surprising one. I put out a video at the end of last year about Keone Rodriguez, and it really surprised me because generally our videos are somewhere between 10 and 20 minutes. They're like dry tutorials, here's how this tool works, here's what's protecting you against, here's how to use it, all this stuff. But I did a video with Keone. He was a developer for Samurai Wallet who was arrested. And it's such a heartbreaking story that he shared. I decided to just release the entire interview, but I released it in a way that kind of told his story and gave people more than just a two-dimensional look. Generally, when people are arrested, when there are criminal investigations, when prosecutors have their way, you get smear campaigns of some of the very people who I think actually heroes in the community, and Keanu is one of those people. If you were to read the news reports, you would have read about this guy who, committed money laundering and helped Russian oligarchs and, contributed to the demise of the fabric of our society. And it's so important to understand that, I mean, Keone is a victim of the war on privacy right now. He was sent to jail for building an open source privacy tool. And I thought it was such an important case because if he went to jail, it meant that any person who built a privacy tool in the future could be at risk. And that was a terrible precedent to set. So I put out this video. It was like over an hour long. And so I was like, no one's going to watch an hour of like an interview, so tell their story. But they did. So it's like, I think it's 650,000 people or something. And it just was immediate. Like everyone's just watching this piece. And I think what struck people was it gave them an insight into how corrupt this justice system can actually be. It gave them a heads up that there is a war on privacy going on, something that they didn't know about. And it just really humanized this person. It actually provided the story that the defense was not allowed to provide in trial. The judge gets to decide what information the jury hears, and the judge refused to let them talk about why Keone actually built this tool. He was a software developer who cared deeply about privacy as a fundamental right and saw it as this, foundation of a free society. And so we kind of told that story. And so I'm really proud of that video. We got it out in a kind of record time. Generally, it takes a long time to put our stuff together, but he literally was going to jail on December 19th. And so we had a finite amount of time, and I wanted him to see it before he went to jail. So I stayed up all night for many, many nights, just like getting through this. And then finally, got it out. And the fact that it resonated with so many people made me really happy. Did it move the needle? I mean, Keone is in jail right now. He will be in jail for the next 5 years. It got a lot of people talking about this. And I'm still hopeful. I mean, they're looking at presidential pardons right now. There is hope that maybe something can be done there. But they also had, a crowdfunding campaign. Their case, they're like $2 million in debt after this. They couldn't even afford an appeal. They had zero money to go through the appeal process, and they wouldn't have been successful anyway by virtue of like the information that the judge would have, actually been willing to hear, etc. So, yeah, I think that human stories like that can remind us that there are real people out there being persecuted by this war on privacy, and that sometimes the community building we do can be used for good in terms of educating people about, some of the people, those being persecuted, and also creating a sort of army of people. If this stuff happens in the future, we have kind of a built-in audience now from that video and say, hey, this is happening again. Maybe we could preempt it the next time. I don't know. But I just want to see more awareness about this stuff out there, because it does move people. And I really want these stories to not be in vain, right? I don't want these people to go to jail for nothing. I want people to learn about them, get outraged about this case, and start to fight back. And if this story can help provide some of that fuel that gets people fired up about the current situation, then, I hope that it made some sort of impact.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think we got time for a few more questions, and then we can start to wrap up. Gordon, Gordona's TV has a question regarding, in the context of building online communities, the trade-offs between the tools that we use. If we're advocating for privacy, is it contradictory to use and consume YouTube versus other tools? How do you weigh those trade-offs, and when you decide what tools to use?
So there's a difference between the tools that I personally use and the vehicles that I use to get information out. So I'll start with the vehicles that I use to get information out. We are on YouTube, we are on TikTok, we are on Instagram, we are on Facebook, we're on LinkedIn. These are all entities that I abhor. I think that, like, I'm on channels with people I disagree with. I'm on, talking to people in person that I dislike. I'm everywhere that I can possibly be. It doesn't matter to me, like where we're spreading this message, as long as everyone deserves privacy, right? This is not an ideological battle for me where I'm trying to convince people of my value system. This is me trying to convince someone with any value system whatsoever that privacy is important. I mean, the reality is that if you're on YouTube and you're using Gmail, you probably don't understand the importance of privacy enough. So that's where we needed to go, we need to be in front of the people who actually can benefit from this. What's surprising to me is sometimes we'll put out like TikTok sketches and it'll be like super basic things that you and I would obviously know about, but the audience will be so surprised that this kind of surveillance has happened. They've never heard of this stuff before. They're in an echo chamber. So I think that should be the aim of everyone, is to try to get into these echo chambers. Find whatever you can to find that bridge and connection to get into all of these echo chambers, to educate people about all of this. They don't know this stuff is going on. So yeah, so if you come to my channel through YouTube, that's great. Happy to have you. If you then want to move to a more privacy-focused one after you've already discovered us, you can get all of our information on minds.com. You can get it all on odyssey.com. You can get it all on Rumble, on like countless BitChute. Like we're on so many platforms out there. So you're not forced to consume us on platforms that are not privacy preserving. You can get the same information in something that aligns with your value system. But yeah, we are intentionally going after the people who need this information. So we're going to where the people are. In my personal tech stack, I'm constantly improving. I am subbing out one thing at a time and trying not to completely derail my life in the process. So I'm trying things out. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Sometimes I, have to revert back until I find something better. Sometimes I find something that works really well. So like our entire team, we use Proton for our company email, for example. We use things like LibreOffice. We use CryptPad. We use, like, there are a lot of great tools out there that as like an institute, we are all using. We still have room for improvement. I mean, you'll notice that there are videos I still haven't done that cover certain things. Like if I haven't done a video on it, I probably haven't implemented it in my life. So it's just a matter of bandwidth, and constantly trying to find things that we can swap out. And tech gets better and better as well. Like I couldn't have made half these videos 10 years ago because these options didn't exist. And it's still the current situation. Like I can't find an open source privacy preserving or like local QuickBooks type thing. I can't find those tools where I can actually track my finances privately, So we kind of have two choices: use spyware or use really janky tools that slow us down and are not ideal. I've opted for the janky tools in that case, but I would much prefer there to be, privacy preserving software I could opt for. Sometimes it just doesn't exist, so we kind of make do with what we have until we find something that we can easily switch out. Google Drive is actually something that I wish that we didn't have to use. We're using a lot of drives right now that end-to-end encrypted, but when you're dealing with 70 gigabytes per video, that's a lot of stuff to end-to-end encrypt, and the friction is insane. And so there are certain things like for transferring videos where we will use non-private methods, again, just for things that end up public consumption anyway, but still I don't want to be using that stuff. So the next project is actually looking at like private servers, using things like Tailscale, having people like connect directly. And obviously there are myriad other problems that can introduce, but that's, the next project that we're in the middle of undertaking now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. There's a lot of folks excited in the forum. We are educating where people are. Maybe we can just wrap up the talk here with your final thoughts and your call to action for building online communities around privacy.
Yeah, I would say the call to action is don't be afraid to assert your own privacy boundaries. There are things that you can just stand steadfast by, and you don't need to be apologetic for wanting it. As we normalize this more and more, this is going to get easier, but really you are going to be the trailblazers that create that normalization. So feel confident in your choices and have the courage to stand by your convictions there. If people say like, hey, let's connect, and they say, well, are you on Telegram? You can say, actually, are you on Signal? You can provide your own option and ask them to come to you rather than, because they had first mover advantage, just going to whatever platform they suggest. You can have your privacy boundaries and be okay sticking by them. And again, lead with kindness. A lot of these people are not making these choices because they're bad people. Sometimes they don't know about the alternatives. Sometimes they don't understand the gravitas of the situation. This is an educational opportunity for us. So we should be excited when we get these educational opportunities. We should try to remember what our mission is. It's not berating people. It's not dunking. It's not proving that we're smarter or anything. Our mission is to safeguard the freedom for every future generation. And to do that, we actually need to be successful in the mission. And to be successful, we have to find those bridges. We have to find where we connect with people. And that's how we can really build community. So thank you all for being here. It's been lovely kind of pontificating, and hopefully there was some valuable stuff there.
Thank you as well for your time, and thanks everyone for watching. This has been a very interesting conversation, and I hope it helps people. So thank you.
Thanks.